All right, we're on here. So first thing we need to do is a little sound check. So when I was a kid, I remember some of your poetry.
Yeah.
One I always liked was the one about the guy next door, he works too hard.
Yeah.
Do you remember that poem?
You mean to recite it?
Yeah,
No.
can you do it?
No.
You don't have it anymore?
No.
The guy next door, he works too hard?
The kids have all got those books. I haven't even got one of those books.
I should have brought him. I'll have to call up my mother or something and have her do that, because I want to have you reciting that poem, because I remember when I used to...
Well, I can't recite any of my poems. I got a whole book of them, but I give all my books away. I haven't even got a book from...
You didn't even say one, huh?
No. I got several poems, probably 20 of them in that book, 20 or 30. But no, I have no record of them. I can't recite them.
You were telling, when I was at Christmas, you were talking about your family and the flu pandemic back in 18, 17?
18, yeah, 1918, yes, I remember it well, yeah.
Talk about that. Tell me what you remember about that.
Well, I remember that my sister and brother, John and Virginia, were laying in a coma. They brought their beds down and put them in the living room, and my mother was in bed. My father and I are the only ones that didn't get the flu. And my brother and sister come close to death, I guess. I remember laying there in several days. They didn't even know anything. And I remember the church bells ringing every half hour, people dying in the town, and it was...
What did they do when somebody got sick? They find a doctor, or...
Well, yeah, I suppose the doctors were stressed out too. Probably wasn't enough for the number of the flu epidemic was, of course, terrible. As I say, I remember the church bells ringing a lot more than usual because of the people that were dying with the flu. But I never got the flu, and I don't know as I've ever had it since then. I never seemed to get the flu. I take shots now, and for both that and I took pneumonia shots, and I got pneumonia anyway.
So, how long were your brothers and sisters in a coma?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I would say a few days. A few days they were laying there. They brought their cots down, beds, and put them right down in the living room. And I remember both of them laying there on those cots, out of it. Didn't recognize anybody. They were in a coma. And I guess that was the case with a lot of people. They come close to death, were in a coma. Of course, my brother and sister recovered.
None of your family members died?
No, nobody, no one in our family died, no. But it was remarkable that I didn't get it. I was right there. I took no special caution. I was right there in the house all the time, in and out, but I just never got it.
Do you remember anything about what they thought caused the flu, or?
What?
You remember what they did to prevent the flu, or what caused it? Or?
No, it was just a terrible epidemic at that time, and I guess at that time they probably weren't sure what caused it. There probably no real medicines against it, I guess. Anyway, it's a renowned epidemic in 1918 flu. And
you were 8 years old at the time?
7 or 8, yeah.
Was that the first house you lived in that you remember?
No, I lived in another house. I was born in another house. Then when Dad bought the farm, we sold the house in we had the old homestead, Dad's homestead. Dad was born. That was where Dad was born. We sold that house and to put on the mortgage on the farm, and we rented a house and for 3 or 4 years before Dad, the family was ready to move out and move up to the farm. Then in 1920, when I was 10 years old, we moved up to the farm.
What do you remember about the house? Did it have running water, lights?
Well, yeah, the old homestead, we had running water and bathtubs and every convenience. We had gas lights. There a lot of coal mines in Norman, Illinois, and everybody had gas instead of electricity, gas lights. And then when we moved to this place that we rented, it had no bathtub. It had just a toilet in the basement. We had to bathe in. Well, I guess I did that even when we went out to the farm. There was no running water on the farm either. So.
What did you do for a bath?
Tub, just a tin tub.
So you fill a tin tub
with hot water out of the cook stove in the summertime, and then in the wintertime when the cook stove was on, there was a hot water reservoir at the end of the cook stove. We used that for bathing, and in the summer, I guess we just heated the water on the. We had a kerosene stove we used in the summer when the cook stove wasn't on. But no running water in the house.
How did you?
Outside toilet. Toilet was a separate building.
What year was that you moved into that house?
1920, and I lived there till 1928. I lived on the farm. I left the farm just as soon as I got out of high school. And so I lived on the farm. I guess only 8 years. As long as I lived on the farm. Went to a country school, one-room school for all 8 grades. One teacher. Walked a mile and a quarter to get to school. No buses. Dirt roads in front of the house. There was no. Dirt roads for the first couple of years. Then they graveled it. And after I left, it was cemented. But I lived on a dirt road in the wintertime. Couldn't even drive the car out. It was so muddy and miry, and we used a bobsled or a horse and buggy in the winter.
What else do you remember about your house? How many rooms did
Well,
it
it was a big house. There was no heat in it. The only heat we had was a stove in the living room down in the basement. No heat upstairs at all. We had a register that come through into my mother and father's room. That the heat that from the downstairs was the only heat that would come up through that register. Otherwise, it was unheated. I remember many days when I'd wake up with snow on the bed. No heat at all. Why, John and my brother and I slept on a straw mattress. See, I don't remember getting cold when my brother and I slept together, and seemed to be when we kept warm all night in our sleeping, but there was no heat. Virginia had a room of her own, and there was 3 bedrooms upstairs. I think my mother and father, John and I, and Ralph. Ralph slept on a cot, and John and I slept together, and then Virginia had a room of her own. But it was a rugged living, I'll tell you.
What was a average day like? So what time would you get up, and what would you do? And
Huh?
What was an average day like? Would you get up? Would you have chores to do when you got up? And
Oh yeah, we had to get up and do the milking every morning. Before, everything, all the chores would get done. I helped my father, and John usually helped my mother.
So you had animals on the farm, and
Yeah, we had to get up and do chores and all the milking twice a day. Milked 5 cows,
5
twice a day.
What other animals did you have?
We had 2 horses that did all our plowing and the tending of the crops, and then we raised hogs. and we had we had chickens and we raised hogs for sale. Besides the pork we butchered, we ate an awful lot of hams and pork. We'd butcher and cure it and just lay there, and we'd what we call sugar cured hams, lay there unwrapped, just in the basin. The basin, of course, is unheated. And then we put down sausage and other meats we put down in lard. But we never butchered beef. We always bought that at the store. But all the pork we ate was all our own butchered pork. And chickens, of course, that'd give us all the eggs and chicken meat we wanted. But potatoes, pretty well, the food we ate in the wintertime was pretty well raised in the summer. Navy beans, we raised all our beans, raised all our potatoes, and the potatoes was stored in the basement all along. When the chickens weren't laying, you put your eggs down in water glass, what they call water glass, and that would preserve the eggs when the chickens weren't laying a couple of months of the year. And we pretty well, we bought very little food. We had most of our own food. Fruit we bought and canned, of course. We didn't have fruit trees, but we bought food in season, and an enormous amount of cans. My mother canned for the wintertime. Hundreds of quarts of peaches and cherries, all prepared in season when the fruits were growing. We didn't have orchard trees. We had to buy the fruit. Mother had we had hundreds of cans of different fruits that we kept, and beans. We canned a lot of green beans. I can't think of other food. Tomatoes. I don't forget whether we had. Yeah, we used to have cans of tomatoes too. Yeah, usually a sauce, tomato sauce, not tomato juice, canned tomatoes. Well, to eat in the wintertime. We had a winter supply of it. That would take. We had 5 children there, so that'd take hundreds of cans of all kinds of fruits and vegetables to be put up in the summer.
So you would get up in the morning and milk cows, and then what, off to school?
Yeah, milk cow and come up and change clothes and go to school. Walk to school until I went to high school, and then they didn't have no bus service into high school at all. We had to have our own transportation. So when I went to high school, it was kind of precarious getting there. I had to sometimes rely on a dentist that lived in Edwardsburg. He used to come by every morning, and he'd pick me up sometime. Then there was a bus that would run from South Bend from time to time. It was not too regular, but then I'd take that for transportation. Then the last couple of years, when John and I went to high school, we had an old Model T Ford that we had to drive to high school. So John and I had a car to go into high school. I was in all sports. John never played football. John never played baseball. I don't know what he did all the time till I was ready to go home. He had to fool around after school. He wasn't on the base. He didn't go out for baseball. He played basketball, is all. But he never went out for baseball or football. So the guy had to wait around for me all week long, an hour or so, while I was practicing all the sports. I was in everything. I guess John did a little track work of some kind. I can't remember what it was. I was a pole vaulter in track, but I was in every sport.
Did you do that after school?
Yeah, practice after school, and the games of course on. I guess we played the games, some of them Saturday, but most of them on Friday afternoon with other schools, neighboring towns around. We won the conference championship in my last year in high school.
So then what time would you get home from school?
Well, probably about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. Then I'd help Dad with the chores, and John was helped with in the house until Virginia got old enough to help. But I did most of the outside work with Dad and the chores, and John did work a lot with my mother. My mother, of course, is a very, very busy woman with 5 children and no facilities. For goodness sake, we didn't even have washing facilities. We we boiled our clothes in a boiler, and I remember she taking it out of the boiler with a wooden stick they had. She'd roll it up, take it out of that boiler, and put it in a washing machine. But the washing machine was a hand washer. You had to propel it with a stick, with a propel the washer by hand, no electricity or anything. And then with a scrub board, she'd scrub all the clothes by hand with a scrub board after would wash with the washer. Very, 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 very tough living, and she had no water, no facilities, conveniences, inside conveniences.
So you would have dinner when you came home, and then what would a typical evening be like?
Just sit around in the evening. Of course, no radios. I was before radio, and we'd go to bed about 8 o'clock at night, and we get up at 6. I'd get up 5:30 or 6 every morning, but no radio. And then finally we got what they used to call a crystal set. You'd get TV on a crystal set. It was
not TV, but radio.
Huh?
Radio, you mean?
Yeah, radio. Yeah, radio. Yeah, yeah. No TV. We never had TV in our house. Of course, what TV come in about 1940, and I was well out of there by that time. And we didn't have a battery radio or anything. We had this it's called a crystal set. I don't know.
That was your first radio?
Yeah, it comes in on some kind of a crystal, and get just a few stations. The WLS was a long time farm station. Just a couple of others. I remember we used to get the Cubs on baseball, but it was only one person could hear it. You had to have earphones, so only one person could hear it at a time.
So you had one radio and one earphone that one person could listen?
Yeah, just one person at a time. We had a long extended aerial, I remember, from the house to the barn that we hooked into, but it's what was called a crystal set. I don't know whether you ever heard of it or not.
I have, yeah. That's what crystal used to be, the tuning mechanism
Yeah.
they used to use. So they used to.
And that was our only communication. Telephone, we always had a telephone, but you just called an operator. There was a party line, and you had to ring to get the operator or ring to get the party line. And you had you called your number into the operator, and she connected you with others that weren't on the party line. The party line, you just rang it. 1 ring, 2 rings was another neighbor, 3 rings was another neighbor. Different kind of ring, 2 longs and a short. We was on a party line with, I think, 6 or 7 people. Very.
Where did you get your clothes?
Huh?
Where did your clothes come from? How would you get those?
Mostly bought clothes. My mother never made any clothes. She used to make all of our nightgown. We wore a nightgown. We wore nightgowns, and my mother made our nightgowns. But all shirts, coats, all clothing was bought. All of our clothing. Mother never.
You remember from where? Was it?
She did a lot of mending. My goodness, she used to mend. She used to sit there evenings mending socks by the hour. When they'd get holes in her toes, we never threw anything away. You'd bend the heels and what they called darning. She used to put the sock on a darning thing and close up the holes, toes and heels. Throw them away at the very end. And I remember we used to wear your stockings a whole week. Mother washed only every Wednesday or every Monday. Every Monday morning was wash day. And we'd wear our clothes for the whole week long. Take a bath only on Saturday night. That tub. And when I went to high school, of course, I was in sports all the time, and I always showered, so I never had to wash at home. But every Saturday night, all the kids, everybody took their baths. One night a week. Wore clothes all week long.
What did the family do for entertainment?
Not much.
Was there
Not
movies?
much.
You remember seeing first movies?
We never went to the movie. No movies. We were poor. We couldn't afford it. We're cheap too. Movies only 10 or 15 cents, but they only. I think I went to one movie, some Western, that was quite popular. And I remember I went to that one movie, but that's the only movies that I remember. Church, we went to church quite regularly. But outside of that, we made our own entertainment.
You remember
Ice skating in the winter, of course. Did a lot of ice skating, a lot of ponds around. But outside of that, we used to scrounge our own Christmas trees, go out through the woods and cut our own Christmas trees. And we hunted and trapped quite a bit for spending money. Trapped for muskrat, skunk. Didn't get many mink. Mostly muskrats and skunk hides.
What do you remember any family vacations when you were little?
Never
go anywhere? Visit Chicago or?
Never took a vacation. I remember. No, always real busy in the summer with crops. We only had 2 horses and a walking plow. We never even had a walking plow. Later, after I left home, they got a tractor. But I remember we used to had a walking plow. We'd plow crops with 10 or 15 acres on it with a walking plow. Plowed only 8 inches around, and we'd round and round and round with that walking plow and then we'd to finish we'd what we called a drag. It was a thing to smooth out the soil that was turned by the plow before planting, and then we had a drill to plant our wheat. Corn. We had a corn planter. We didn't drill in corn at that time. We planted corn every 24 inches each way instead of drilling it in. Now they never used fertilizer. Now most corn is the soil is used just to hold the roots. Otherwise, there's all different kinds of fertilizers used now. And the corn, of course, is much better than it used to be in the olden days. We used to use our own seed for corn, and corn wasn't near as good as it is today, and not near as prolific as it is. Corn mostly now is drilled in rows 2 feet apart, but drilled along like wheat down, and every 2 or 3 inches apart. And we used to raise oats to feed the cattle, and then of course we made all our own cattle feed for the winter. In hay, we had big hay fields, and it was also cut with a 2-horse mower, with big 15 or 16 acres of hay, and then we had a marsh that grew hay, just wild hay. And the marsh was so wet we had to put what we called marsh shoes on the horses so they wouldn't sink in when we were cutting the marsh hay. Rugged life.
Yeah.
Rugged life.
So did you travel to other towns as part of sports?
Huh?
Did you have to go to other towns as part of your sports? So you got to travel around?
Yeah. Most of them we were able to get to with cars. Most of them were Model T cars. Yeah, but we traveled mostly. We had no school buses or anything to travel. It was all cars that the team traveled in. 4 or 5, 6 cars. I guess it took the football team to travel in. I think we carried about not more than 20 were out for school. We never had a second team. I don't think there's 11, only 11, maybe 8 subs. But not more than 20 or 21 kids came out for football, I guess, in the whole school.
How many people were in your high school?
Well, my graduating class got down to 28 people. When we started out, there was 160 in the freshman class, and they kept dropping out till at graduating, I think it was only 28 people, 20 in my graduating class.
Did your parents encourage you to stay, or did you want to?
No, they encouraged me to stay. That was an expense for them too, of course. We had no transportation to get there, and
Did all your brothers and sisters finish high school?
yeah, all finished. The only one who went to college was Ralph, the son. John and I, Virginia, all just finished high school. But we all finished 4 years of high school.
But a lot of families didn't.
Huh?
Did the reason that there were so many dropouts, was that because families thought it was more important to work on the farm? Or?
Yeah, they just dropped out of school. But I remember it was about 100. It seemed like about 160. It started out in the freshman year, and 28 to 30. I don't know how many of the junior classes behind me, but there was only about 28 to 30 by the time they got to graduation.
And
they just drop out and go to work on their farms, or just go to work in factories, or just not finish high school. Very few finished compared with what started out in the 9th grade.
So did the families have to pay for the high school then, or was it public education like it is today?
Well, there's public education. I don't know what we bought. Of course, we bought all our own school book. All our own school books were purchased by individuals. That was with 4 children. It was quite a. I don't think I ever had a new book. We always used to get second-hand books. You'd buy all the drugstores would carry second-hand books at the first season. So I don't think I ever had a new book. All our family used secondhand books. But we had to purchase our own books, and I don't know. I guess the schools purchase them now, don't they, for you?
Yeah, I think they give the basic books, yeah. The public schools,
Yeah. Yeah, we had to furnish all our own books, all our own writing paper, everything, all accessories, all. But I don't know whether there's any, and it seems to me there's a tuition to go to high school too. I'm not sure of that, however.
So when did did the family have a car then or not?
We always had a car, yeah. We had a car that Dad bought in 1914. We used it till 1925. Same car, old Model T car, but we had it. Dad used to do all the repair work on it. Of course, it's very simple. Model T Fords were very simple to keep in repair. He ground his own valves, and any repair work needed to be done. It was done by him, my dad. But we had that car for, well, yeah. We wrecked the car. John and I. We used to carry. It was an old top. It had an old top on it, and the top would come up and down. Kept a top on it for bad weather, then your top would go down in good weather. And we used to haul stuff in it. We used some coal to burn, and we were hauling coal. And John and I were coming home with a load of coal. Somehow or another, in gravel road, it was kind of hard to steer, and we got off the road and hit a post and ruined that car. And that was about 1925. And so we bought a sedan for the first time there. An old sedan. It's an old sedan. I don't know whether you ever remember anything like that or not. They just had one door in the middle on both sides. And you loaded the front and the back from, you got in the middle door and walked around the seat to get to the steering wheel. Of course, the back seat was right there at the door. But the doors were just two doors. The doors were in the middle.
Remember who made it, or?
Huh?
You remember who made it?
Ford, yeah, all Fords.
That would have been in 1925. So at what age did you start driving the Model T?
Well, I got a special license being a farm boy at 14, but you couldn't get a driver's license until 16. But farm kids got theirs at 14. So I got mine. Shortly after we come up to the farm. I moved up to the farm in 10. I had my driver's license at 14 to drive. And that's the only car we had until we just had that sedan after that. We kept that for as long as I lived on the farm. We kept that car. And I left in 1928. 1928, graduated from high school. I was working in the dairy there or something in Cass, and then I worked in the bakery. In October, my school friend and I, one of the boys I graduated with, decided to take a trip to California. We were going to California. So we had an old Templar. I know everybody heard of. That's the only car I ever heard of with that name. It was called a Templar. Anyway, we started out, and I don't know what we had in mind. We didn't have enough money to get there. We run out of money in Keokuk, Iowa, and fortunate enough to get a job on the road. We worked on the road for a couple of weeks and decided California was out, so we we started back in that old temper, and the lights burned out on the way back to Chicago. All night long we drove. It was nice night, as I remember, and quite a good moon out. But I don't think we run into three or four cars during the nighttime. No traffic at all, and we traveled all night long. Got into Chicago the next morning. But I don't think lights probably went out at 10 or 11 o'clock. We drove all night long, and with no bother of traffic.
What were the roads? Were the roads paved or?
Paved road, yeah. It was a paved road all the way to Chicago. Yeah. Started about 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, I remember. Got into Chicago Sunday morning. And then, fortunately, my friend, brother-in-law, had a job and worked in Chicago. He got us a job in the streetcar company, both of us. A pretty fair job for those days. I think we got 75 or 80 cents an hour.
What'd you have to do?
Well, first we were washing windows in the streetcar buildings for 4 or 5 months. I mean, I worked in the paint shop painting roofs of streetcars. Well, I guess I worked there for 5 or 6 years. Dick quit and went back to Michigan to live. He only worked there a couple of years, but I guess I worked there. Well, I worked there till after I was married, 1932. So I worked there 4 or 5 years, and it was a very menial job, and wasn't getting any place. I could have been I guess if I worked up to painting streetcars, I started out with roofs. I was painting on the roofs of streetcars.
What year was that?
1928. We come right back. We was only gone about 3 or 4 weeks and came back to in October, or latest the 1st of November when we got back. And right away brother-in-law got us this job in the streetcar company. And it was just at the start of the terrible depression, and I finally got what I thought was a good job with the household finance. I went to household finance, finally got a job there that I thought would be a better job, and I only worked. I had a hard time getting it, but I kept going down and talking to the guy. He was from Cass, his friend of my father-in-law's, and he finally got me into the household finance where he was working. I worked 1 week and got fired. Fired me after a week. And
what did you have to do? What were you supposed to do?
I was out collecting money for the people that couldn't pay their bills. I wasn't very good at that. Anyway, he fired me after the first week of work, out of work, and I didn't. I got very menial jobs for a long time. I was still collecting, but I was collecting. I got a job collecting, but it was for not people that didn't have about to be evicted from their homes. I used to try and get $1 or $2 out of them, and I wasn't so good at that, so I got fired. Anyway, I went to the Midland Club as a collector. That was collecting from people that weren't paying their bills. They belonged to a city club, and they were lawyers, doctors, and people that worked downtown Chicago. It was a luncheon club, is what it was. And some rooms there, they had room for people. Anyway, it was what they call a city club, and that was a lot easier connecting from those type of guys than it was from these poor people that didn't have a just couldn't pay their bills. And so I did that for, I guess, a year and a half, and then I went out with the manager of that city club. He was a manager. He got a job as a manager of a golf club, Olympia Fields Golf Club, one of the most exclusive clubs in Chicago. And I went out there with him for that summer. Catherine was pregnant. We couldn't find a place out at Olympia Fields to live, so she had to go back to Michigan to live with my parents all summer long, and I lived out there at the country club, $75 a month. Everything found. I got all my room and board, everything. But that's all I got for that. I was making $75. Then out of work in November. And one of the members at that country club was a general manager of all the Sears stores, and he got me a job. Well, I went into him, and he put me on. Well, he didn't really put me on. He transferred me to the manager of the store downtown, and I got on as an extra, what they called an extra. You'd go in there about 8 o'clock in the morning and sit there all day long until they needed you, either on the floor for a busy time or in the shipping room. In the shipping room, mostly they'd get busy in the afternoon and sit there and wait to go to work. Mostly you got on sometime during the day for 4 or 5 or 6 hours, but sometimes you'd sit down there and never get a job at all. So it wasn't a very good job, very, very meager job. I think I was making $12 or $13 a week, and Catherine came over. We had a little one-room apartment, and we had the baby. $12 or $13 or $14 a week is about the extent of my salary, and then I kept working up from then on in the stockman, and finally got on the sales floor, and then managed the rug department. I was manager of the rug department.
And what year would that have been?
At Sears, I worked for Sears then for 40 years.
Right.
Yeah.
But during the Depression, what?
During
the Depression?
During the Depression, yeah. That's when I got that
was the first
bigger job, yeah. And really, well, I guess it was awful hard to get any job, so this guy he just referred me to the manager of the State Street store, and they put me on there mostly through his influence, I suppose, because it's awful hard to get in. I suppose he had some influence on that, but he did very little. I went into his office, he referred me to the manager of State Street, and he put me, managers at that store, put me on. So, but that's, I just progressed from there on, and I spent all my working life at Sears, retired at Sears. When I finally retired, I never got to be in the big money, the manager of the stores, they're the guys that made the big money. But I retired as merchandise manager. That was manager of I was manager of the hard lines and big tickets, all of the Grand Rapids store. I made a mistake. I was manager of Lawrence Avenue, and I could have continued there, but State Street, the guy went to the Army, and I guess I didn't think he was coming back or something. Anyway, I transferred to the State Street store, and during his term in the Army, be damned if he didn't come back after about a year and a half. So I was out of a job. I couldn't get back into all the Sears stores had their department managers, so I had to sell furniture for a while, but I through my management, I knew the sales manager of the rug department for the whole company, and luckily, well, I was probably lost. I got lost and just had to go selling furniture after.
Break.
Vice manager. I never got to be store manager in the big money, but I made a fairly good living at finally before I retired at Sears. I retired early. I retired when I was 59 years old, and Catherine figured it out. She says, we've got enough, figured out that we had enough money to last us till we're 90 years old. Well, she had it figured out real good because our money lasted real good. In fact, it lasted a lot longer. She lived to be 93, and I'm still going. And we got some inheritance when my brother died. He had no children, so my younger brother died, and I got $24,000 or $25,000 out of him. But my money is I'm still living on my own with I still got money left with investments and so forth. I retired with about $125,000, I think.
So what did we were kind of in the middle of the Great Depression, and you found your job at Sears. What house did you live in? You remember where you lived in the middle of the Great Depression?
I was living in a little one-room apartment when I got in from Olympia Fields and went to work with Sears. That was in 19 I guess 1931 to 32.
31. So 29, the Great Depression started. You remember hearing about that? You remember?
Well, I guess so. Banks were going broke right in the house. 25% unemployment. At 25%, I don't think it's ever been that since then. There's 25% unemployment in the depths of the Depression. And of course it got better, but very, very slowly. Very
So
slow.
the first 2 years of the Depression. So you remember the day it crashed and the market crashed? Did everybody
Yeah, I remember very well when the day the market crashed. Yeah. Brokers were jumping out of windows and downtown Chicago. Yep. Well, banks were going broke right and left. I guess I had $200 or $300 in one of the bank there where I lived out near Stony Island, 69th Street, 67th Street. Bank I was banking in went broke. I lost almost. I had a couple $100 in it, I guess.
So you lost your money?
Broke.
You lost the money?
Yeah, oh yeah. I never got it. Never got it back. No guarantee of deposits. I just wonder what they'd do now if they went back, had a depression to that extent. I don't think the government could reimburse people up to $100,000.
Yeah, well, not that extent, but they don't have the margin out and other things that they.
Huh?
They had, a lot of people had borrowed money on margin and stocks, and
Yeah.
didn't allow quite that level of leveraging anymore.
Yeah, that's right. It seems to me they were leveraging up to 75%.
90, I think.
It seems to me then they kept putting limitations on government, kept putting limitations on stock being bought on margin. But I remember several guys. I used to, after I retired, I spent 2 or 3 or 4 years fooling around in the market. I think in that 3 or 4 years, I lost $3,000 or $4,000 instead of making any money. But anyway, I remember the guys used to sit down there day after day after day. But I remember several guys that were lost all their money while they were betting on the market. I never went into that deep to that extent, but some guys were into it real deep. Well, all of their money I've seen several of those guys that used to sit down the market go absolutely broke, just absolutely broke them.
So you lived in, so 1931 you moved into,
When cousin came back to Chicago with the baby, we lived in a one-room apartment, no bedroom. The bed just pulled out of the closet down to sleep on.
what was the,
I had just one room, no dining room, nothing. We had a kitchen with a stove and an oven, and I guess pretty complete. So we were able to cook our own food, but no dining room to live. We ate right there in the living room, and then we kept moving to bigger and better apartments. Did you ever read that book of Catherine's that she wrote on? I think we moved 28 times in my lifetime.
no, I don't remember it.
She wrote a book on that.
All the moves? Yeah.
It's around someplace. I married Joe or your mother or somebody has got a copy. She she made copies for all of the family, immediate family. Eh? Anyway, it's a record of all the moves we made in our lifetime. And when I retired, mother had figured it out pretty well, and so we lived there in Grand Rapids, and mother built 2 houses, of course. I don't know whether you remember those 2 houses she built or not. She built 2 houses as a hobby, but we moved 5 or 6 times in that time in Grand Rapids. Yeah, well, I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, 5 or 6 times. This was 7 times maybe, while it was Grand Rapids. Then anyway, I retired in 1969, when I was 59 years, 1969. And we lived fairly well. Went to Florida every winter. We had an apartment we stayed in the summertime. We lived in, Dave had an apartment building at part of the time, I remember, and I lived in, I rented his one apartment. He had a duplex, and I rented one apartment there for several years. In the summertime, in the wintertime, we'd go to Florida, and some guy was studying for the ministry of Christian Reformed Church was going to Calvin, and he lived there in the winter, and he'd go out in the countryside on missions in the summertime. So we took his apartment in the summer and paid him the rent, of course, but we only paid rent then for half a year. But we lived in Florida for 30 years, off and on. We owned a house, but once we owned a house, but the rest of the time we had apartments and rent. The last 10 years, Charlie bought a mobile home, and we rented a mobile home from him. Johnny owned it, but I rented his mobile home. I paid him year-round, I think, for that, yeah. I paid him year-round for that. I paid only the rent. But we lived there. We lived there for 10 years. But for the other, we lived in Florida for 25 years, different apartments. And one time we owned a house for a year or so, and I couldn't get it taken care of good in the summer when we were north, and so we sold the house, and we just rented different apartments for the winter until the last 10 years. I lived in Charlie's apartment. Mobile home. Double wide. Well, you remember that probably. You were.
Sure.
Huh?
Margot, you mean?
Yeah.
I do remember that.
Yep. So we were there.
Go back to the Great Depression and talk about what life was like in the.
Well,
Was it hard to?
it was tough.
You had a job.
When you figure, well, of course, Of course, food was cheap too. We'd buy bread 5 cents a loaf and ham 10 cents a pound. Food was very cheap, and the first few years, Dad and Mother furnished Dad furnished all my potatoes that we had, and but food was very cheap. Of course, meat 10 cents a pound, hamburger 10 cents, 5 or 10 cents a pound. All the meat was very cheap. All food was bread 5 cents a loaf. Food was comparatively cheap, so we on my $12, $13 a week, we ate we never went hungry. I think we paid $25 a month. Instead of 25%, we were paying about half of my money for rent. You're only supposed to pay about 25% of your salary if you're doing right. Other times, then we moved up from apartment to apartment, bigger apartments, all from time to time. And a lot of course, during the Depression was still on, and building after building in Chicago, brand new buildings, were going broke, empty, and real cheap. I think the last one we rented apartment was $25 a month, a fairly nice building, a brand new building that was owned by a holding company. I think I paid $25 a month there. But building after building in Chicago were brand new buildings, were empty, broke.
You remember?
A lot of empties.
Remember, were people begging and?
Oh yeah, when I worked in the shipping room, I'd work evenings, and people every night when there was a restaurant there, when the restaurant and food store threw their garbage out, many people, homeless people, were right there in that garbage, digging out the food that's edible. Many people were there. That was a loading dock, and where the trash thing was, and they'd come out with a waste food for the day, and people were right there to pick it up. Lots of people, homeless people.
Well, that whole family lived out under bridges, or what did they do?
Well, of course, when I was collecting from those poor families. Yeah, they were many poor families I had to call on that were not paying their household finance bill, and I'd try to get $1 or $2 out of them. They were about to be evicted. I don't know what the household finally did, whether they evicted them or just went along with their people that couldn't pay back, just with the little people people could collect from. But I wasn't too good at that. Of course, got fired from at a very, very poor time to get a job with 25% unemployment. It wasn't easy to find work, and I worked for pretty meager salary for a long time.
All right, go ahead. Let's the end of this tape.
Huh?